Okay. You want to get started or you want to wait a little bit longer?
No, let's go ahead and get started. And if you're late, you're late. Hello, everyone. So we're going to talk about natural language training and best practices today. And brief introduction to myself. My name is Roger Kibbe. I'm a senior developer evangelist. That's my Twitter handle at Roger Kibbe. A couple personal things. I'm a father of 2 teenage daughters, hence I have some gray hair. And I'm a UC Berkeley graduate, so I was going to say go Bears. And my co-presenter is Jonathan. Jonathan, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey guys, my name is Jonathan. My Twitter handle is John without the H. I'm also a developer evangelist for Bixby, and I have 4 too many cats. I'm just excited to be here with you guys, despite the current, stuff that's going on. So thank you for joining us.
All right. So one of the things I'm going to emphasize today is I like to say training is as much an art as a science. And as we go through that, I'm going to explain why I say that, but it's really important to think of it that way. So first thing I'm going to talk about is what I call the science of training, kind of the hard capabilities of training and how to set it up in Bixby. So a couple of, just go over some terminology. If you're experienced with Bixby, I'm probably telling you things you already know, but just to level set everyone, because I'm going to be using this terminology as we go through and talk about this, and I think it's really important. So training is that set of utterances that you set up, and then Bixby's AI uses it to interpret the voice input from a user. A goal is, hey, what do I do with that utterance? When I see that utterance, what am I trying to achieve? And a goal can be either an action or a concept. All right. An action, I always like to refer to this, is the verb of the utterance. It's what you're trying to do. So it's the action that Bixby performs on behalf of the user. So I'm going to use a lot in this presentation the Movie Finder capsule. It's a capsule we have on GitHub, and it's for finding movies. And I have a couple examples here. So find movie is the action, the main action in the find movie capsule. If you have a quiz, it'd be something like run quiz. Okay, a couple more things. A concept. I always like to talk to these. These are the nouns in your utterance. So those entities that Bixby's AI extracts and are very important to your input. So in the movie finder, we're looking for a movie or a genre or a person name, etc. And then finally, the plan. And the plan really shows you, hey, when the user says this utterance and you have this training, this is how Bixby's AI is going to interpret that. And it's definitely something you want to understand and review, because it shows you how Bixby is going to understand and use your training. By the way, as I'm talking right now, this will be about a 20-ish minute presentation, and we're going to go to open Q&A and kind of AMA style. But if you have any questions at all, please add those to that YouTube live chat, because Jonathan right now is keeping track of all those questions. I won't answer them while I'm presenting, but right after that, hopefully we have a good queue of questions. So bring on the questions. All right. So something that's really powerful with Bixby is enumerations and vocabulary. And what is an enumeration? If you have a concept that has a defined set of possible valid inputs. So if you look on the left-hand side here, I have a concept for movie genre that is used by the movie agent, all right? There's about, 15 or 20 possible movie genres here. And what that is telling Bixby is these are the only valid inputs when I'm asking for a genre, all right? That's great, but you often pair this with a vocabulary. All right, the vocabulary for movie genre is over there. Really simple in this case. Sometimes it gets more complicated. But let's take an example of science fiction. So science fiction, you can say science fiction. You could type in science/fiction. You could say sci-fi, etc. So what you're doing here is setting up essentially aliases or synonyms for that actual enumerated value. So if I said to Bixby, find a sci-fi movie, what that Bixby would resolve with this setup is to science fiction. So what you say is resolved to the actual enumeration, and that's defined in the vocabulary. All right? And like I said, this is from the movie agent. At the bottom of each of these slides, as much as possible, I tried to take my examples from code that exists and is on GitHub and you can download. So that's the link to the GitHub repo for Movie Agent. And this presentation is already up. At the very end of the presentation, I'm going to show you a link to grab this presentation. We'll also share it on all of our social media channels just after we talk today. All right. The other thing you can do is vocabulary only. This is not used as often, and I think a little bit underutilized by Capsule developers. Right here, I have an example from an open-ended adventure game. It's a sample capsule. And what you're doing with vocabulary only is you're saying, hey, here's some expected inputs, not the only inputs. But you can see this is this open-ended adventure game. These are a bunch of actions that the user could use in the adventure game, a bunch of the commands that could tell it to do. What this does is give hints to Bixby's ASR and NLU around what to be expected input. So when you create a vocabulary, you're basically making the ASR and the natural language understanding work better, because saying, hey, here's a bunch of words that we think are valid inputs. And if I get something that maybe sounds like or similar, I'll make that correction and resolve it to it. So if you find in your testing your capsule, for instance, you're asking for some input and the ASR isn't quite capturing it right, think about creating a vocabulary. This is a very limited thing, but I've seen vocabularies that are thousands of lines long. There's a capsule that is an airport finder and has that, and there's thousands of airports in the world. So it literally has vocabulary with thousands of airport names in it, and it resolves to each of those. So very useful and a little bit underutilized in the capsules that I've seen today. All right. When you're talking about a conversation with Bixby, we have terminology for each of the steps in a conversation. So when we talk about outer training, what we're talking about is an utterance to begin a conversation. So the example here is, what movie should I watch? Would be an utterance to start the movie finder capsule. All right. Then in movie finder, what it does is it prompts you. So then I have a prompt utterance, and then there's possible continuations. Let me jump to my slides ahead of this because I give some in-depth examples. All right. So here I'm using movie finder, and you can see what movie should I watch. Okay. And what it does, it returns a bunch of genres for you. But look down below, and I literally took screenshots from the training to show you how this works. What movie should I watch is training. Its goal is a movie concept, and there's no specialization. Let me get back to specialization in a second. All right, so you fire up movie finder, what movie should I watch? Then it asks you what genre are you in mood for. So what Bixby is doing is prompting you for what genre. In this case, I want training for that specific prompt. So, for instance, if I said Western, and then it would show me a list of Western movies. But look at that training on the bottom right-hand side. So it's Western. Its goal now is a movie genre, and it's at prompt for a movie genre. You'll see that pattern very often. As a matter of fact, almost always, the goal and at prompt for are the same concept. So you're saying, when I ask the user for movie genre, I'm providing some training that is the utterances that will support answering what that genre is. All right? All right, continuations. So using the movie finder as an example as well. So you saw I said Western, and movie finder showed a bunch of Western movies, and the training is the same as on the previous page. But then I could say something like, that came out last year. All right? Excuse me. Now what that is a continuation. Now think of that, in this case, it's refining my results. So I had all the Western movies in the database. Now I just want to show me Western movies that came out last year. That's a refinement. you train that as a continuation. So look on the bottom right, only show movies that came out last month. Really good example. That's not the same sentence that came out last year, but Bixby's AI is good enough to understand both of those and working. We'll talk a little bit later about not overtraining your capsule. This is an example where one piece of training captures some different phrases. Anyway, that came out last year, shows you those movies that came out last year. Now look at that. It's a continuation of movie, right? So in that first way, I'm showing movies, actually an array of movies. But when I show movies and I say that came out last year, I'm saying, hey, I will understand some additional natural language that in this case refines that. Let me give you another example of that. So I want to talk about continuations and I want to touch on relaxations, not specifically NLU related, but important for natural language. All right. So if I said, I create this recipe finder capsule and I say, hi, Bixby, what should I cook for dinner tonight? And Bixby shows me a bunch of dinner recipes. So that was my outer training. What should I cook for dinner tonight? Now I say, show me some Italian ones, right? And then it shows you Italian dinner recipes. So I had a continuation that was show me Italian ones. So I've narrowed that to show me just Italian dinner recipes. But now I say, show me Mexican ones instead. That's another continuation training. In this case, I'm not narrowing. The thing is, Italian and Mexican are referenced by the same concept. So this says, hey, replace Italian with Mexican and then rerun my logic. And if you know Bixby, you know you don't have to write any code to do that. Bixby just does that for you. It says, hey, there's a continuation, something changed. I will automatically rerun your code. And in this case, display the search results to the user. All right. Then I say with sausage and onions, I'm narrowing that down. And I want to show you what a relaxation is. And then I say without gluten. The challenge is with my capsule, I don't have any Mexican dinner recipes with sausage and onions that are gluten-free. All right. So I could just show an error message to the user or sorry, no results. That's pretty unfriendly. What Bixby lets you do is set up what's called a relaxation. And what that does is lets you drop some of the inputs. And you can define what inputs and in what order you drop them until you get one or more results. And in this case, you get a little nice phrase, hey, couldn't find them without gluten. I'm going to show you your previous results. Not strict relaxations are something that you do in your action. So not strictly related to natural language training. But I think they pair really, really well with continuations. And that's why I wanted to bring them up and show them to you today. Okay, how many words should I use in my training? All right, let's look at this example at the left. And this is from a super simple capsule. If you've ever watched the Bixby 101 video, this is the capsule that I use in that video to show you kind of the Bixby basics. You basically ask it, what is the capital of an estate name? And it gives you the capital of that state. All right, so if I ask, what is the capital of Oregon? And you can see what is the capital of California is marked as an annotation. So there's the concept of a state is there. That'll work great. But if I just left that training there and I said, what is the capital of North Carolina? You know what? It's going to fail. Why? Because in that first training example, California is one word. So you've told Bixby, look for one word answers. North Dakota is two words. So in order to make North Dakota work, I would need to add a second piece of training. And then, so you can see down below in the bottom left, what is the capital of New Mexico? It could be North Carolina, South Carolina, North Dakota, South, any two-word state. I'm there. And I match that up to the state concept. And now that will work. So the point being, you need to think about when you're creating your training and you're thinking about those concepts. Are those valid concepts? Are they one word? Are they two words? Are they three words? You need to create training for each of those. One thing to definitely watch out for, and I've seen really advanced developers, internal developers miss this, is when you're creating enums and vocabulary, you can have an enum that has single words and multiple words in it. So one words and two words, or you can have a vocabulary where you have a single word, but one of the aliases is multiple words. In order to support that, you have to have that training for, in this case, if it's 1 and 2 words, both 1 and 2 words. So net, this is an example, test. Always test with different length inputs. I will tell you, this is something the certification team always tests, because a really common thing for people to do is they're like, got it, I got this amazing capsule, and I'm going to test it, and I just try it with one word concepts, but 2-word concepts will be valid. Well, the certification team is wise to this, and they'll definitely test for multiple words. And I have seen dozens, maybe even hundreds of capsules rejected for this. It's one of the most common reasons to get rejected. This goes back to test. Testing your training is so important to do, and try it with a bunch of different variations. All right. I want to talk about a couple of advanced training concepts that I think are really useful. One pretty commonly used is called roles, and one routes, a little less used, but really valuable to understand how to do that when you need to do that. Okay, roles. So I am using the sample bank capsule here on GitHub, and it's a sample bank capsule, and it understands things like make a transfer from savings to checking, all right? But if you looked in the concepts of how those are modeled in Bixby for the sample bank capsule, you'd say, hey, there's an account type, there's an account type, and maybe it has savings and checking and CD and investment, all right? Concept. But then I have 2 concepts that are called role of, a from account and a to account. And why do I need to create these? Well, look at that sentence again. There's 2 of the same concept there, but they have different meanings. Make a transfer from account to account. So if you look at the training down below, you see those roles, right? So savings in this example is the from account, and checking is the to account. So whenever you have the same concept used more than once in an utterance, but it has a different meaning, you definitely want to think about roles and using roles to make it work. All right? Definitely check out the capsule sample bank. It's one of the better capsules actually for understanding training. It's a pretty simple capsule, but there's some pretty good training in there and some pretty sophisticated stuff. All right, routes. So I'm going to give an example of what a route is. I'm going to go back to my favorite movie capsule here. All right, we said, what movie should I watch? And we knew that it would ask me for a genre. But if you look at the bottom of the screen, there's a conversation driver, help me choose. Okay, well, how would I make this work? Because we saw those genres are in an enumeration. Help me choose is not a genre, right? It's a different path. All right. And what it does, help me choose, is actually forks away from kind of the main happy path to this alternate happy path, which is it goes in this quiz and asks you a bunch of silly questions, with the end result being the answer to your questions will define and find a movie for you. So how do I train this? I want to say, when I say help me choose, I want to go down this alternate route. Look in that bottom right at that training. Help me choose. It's at prompt for movie genre. But now look at that flag, and there's a route to run quiz. And what this says is, hey, when I say help me choose, instead of going to the default, and I think it's find movie is the action that is normally invoked here if you clicked on one of the, or said one of those genres, it says, hey, no, don't go to that default, that action there. Sidestep it, go over to this run quiz action, run that, and when you're done with that, we'll go back to find movie, right? So if in your capsule, you have kind of the standard path, that kind of the happy standard path, but you have another path that may happen, maybe less often, or just another alternative for the user, then you want to think about using routes in your training. I'll tell you another good example here is in an e-commerce capsule. So you might go to the cart, right? From the cart, what's the next possible thing you're probably going to do? I don't know, maybe it's grab payment information or whatever the next screen, or ship to or from address, etc. That would be kind of the happy standard path. But what happens if I say I have 2 shirts in there and I say I only want 1 shirt? What I'm doing there is I'm altering the cart. So I need something like an alter cart or change cart action. And then I need to train, change, what was my example? I only want 1 shirt. So I train, I only want 1 shirt to actually go to that alter cart action. Another good example of when you'd use a route in your training. And like I said, Sample Movie Agent uses this. Okay, so that's it for the science of training. Let me talk about the softer side, and I'll call it the art of training. So the first thing that I like to really emphasize is like to say training is not developing. What the heck do I mean by that? I mean, it's really different mentally, all right? So, right, if you're developing in Bixby, right, you're doing a bunch of modeling, you're writing some JavaScript code, traditional development with some modeling throwing in. With training, you're definitely mapping it to those models. But what you're really thinking about is all the different ways that a user could say something in your capsule that you want to understand. So I don't think that's so much of a development process. It's kind of almost a linguistics process, or thinking about the different ways that someone could say something. What I would suggest if you're an individual developer is go with your training, go find, I don't know, your partner, or your friend, colleague, whatever, and go have them take a look and try your capsule. Because I've seen many times really amazing capsules, but they didn't spend enough time in training, or they went through it in one way, and then very first time someone else tries to use it, they say something slightly different, doesn't match training. They're like, this is busted. It's not busted. It just is missing that training. So it's definitely different than developing. And as a matter of fact, if you're a voice agency or a larger company doing voice development, they often have a development team, and then they have voice designers that think about things like all the possible utterances and what you'd transform into training, because it's a different skill set and mindset. I'm going to talk about some principles of training, and then broken record, test, and retest. All right, training principles. Training should be tightly scoped, well-discriminated, and obviously annotated. What do I mean by that? What do I mean by tightly scoped? What I mean is train as little as possible while still providing a useful experience. As a matter of fact, I just say this to any voice experience. You want your voice experience to work really well for its intended purpose. But if people start asking it things that's not its intended purpose, shy away from trying to answer every possible question, because you're going to get yourself in a mess. So I have the example in that graphic. It's a recipe finder. So on the left, do. Yeah, those are all things that I should train and understand. Now look over on the right. The inner circle I should understand. But then there's some things that, what is an ingredient? How long do I boil potatoes? Those are getting the corner cases. If I add those to my capsule, I have exploded the scope of my capsule. And if I add those outer ones, and the outer one, like now there's a wine pairing question, I've really exploded the scope of my capsule. The challenge is then is I'm getting this kind of Swiss Army knife capsule that tries to do everything. I will tell you, that will be an incredibly difficult capsule to write. It'll be incredibly complicated and numerous training examples, and you're not going to probably get it right. And people will break it. So people should, with a voice experience, this is what my voice experience does. This is what it's good at. And as your users are interacting with it, they'll understand its purpose and what it's good for, and ask it relevant questions. When you start trying to train all the edge cases, you often get yourself into trouble. So keep your training and really the scope of what you're building in a voice experience tightly scoped. Oops, went backwards. All right, well-discriminated. What do I mean by well-discriminated? Well, on the left, I have some well-discriminated queries here. So recipes for chicken, status of a flight, and can I recycle? How are these well discriminated? Well, if I took away chicken and AA and 1600 in receipts, I'd still know recipes for, hey, that's a recipe finder capsule. Or status of flight, looking for flight, or can I recycle? So it helps you recycle. If you look at your training queries, your utterances, and if you take away what you've annotated to match a concept, and it still makes sense to you what your capsule does, then those are well-discriminated queries. So just a little test you can do. What about on the enumerations and vocabulary? So I have an example here. Will it be rainy? Okay. Will it be rainy? Will it be snowy? Will it be sunny? Those all seem like valid things to put in a potential enumeration or variances in the vocabulary. But I wanted to put nice. Okay, what does nice mean? I mean, I like it when it's sunny, but I know people really love the snow and like it's snowy. And I even know like one of my daughters really likes it when it rains. That's not a good match there, nice or bad. Maybe you have that as training, but I'd say in a weather capsule, that's a nebulous thing to put in there. My second example, and this is something I see fairly commonly. Okay, I have some kind of restaurant finder or fast food finder, find a Starbucks, a Taco Bell, and then some people put in things like in their enumeration or even in the vocabulary, particularly here, the Starbucks or a Taco Bell. Bad thing to do. So Taco Bell should not have vocab, a Taco Bell. You're going to confuse Bixby's AI if you do that. Now, find a Taco Bell, where Taco Bell is the actual concept that's flagged there, and find Taco Bell is two separate trainings are valid, and then it'll work for any possible input. But avoid words like the and a, etc., in enumerations and vocabulary. Those are not well discriminated. Okay, obviously annotated. The best way I can describe this is to show you some things that aren't annotated well. Confusing annotations. So here's some bad annotations. Split the bill. All right. And what I've done here is I've said, hey, I've actually tagged split as a concept. Okay, that might be okay, but look at my second training. What is the total split 4 ways? All right, I tagged 4 as split amount, but now I didn't tag split. So this is going to confuse Bixby's AI if the same word is tagged in one training and not tagged in another. Have you ever seen when you're writing training and it says confusion point? This is a confusion point. I don't understand how you could tag split here and not tag split there. That is confusing Bixby's NLU and it won't even compile. So another example, do I need an umbrella today or will it rain today? Okay, will it rain? Rain is a weather condition. That's valid. But do I need an umbrella? Need an umbrella is not really a weather condition. And I'd avoid putting them, just like a and the, not good things to typically put in a training. Now, maybe you say, do I need an umbrella or to wear shorts or something like that to make your capsule work a little better. But avoid things like need and it's not a weather condition. It's something different. So think about how it's annotated and don't confuse Bixby's AI and NLU by putting conflicting annotations in there. Okay. I said I'd be a broken record about this, and I am. But I really think training is all about testing, and retesting. You know, get some sample utterances, write some very simple training, test it, modify it a little bit, and then get it so it works. And then as you're building your capsule, keep on going and go and test and retest. One of the things one of the reasons I emphasize this is I think there's a little bit of a developer, I'll call it disease, to go spend tons of time on modeling and writing code and all the stuff you're used to doing in any application, web application, a mobile application, etc. And then you're like training, oh, it's a conversational application. I got to throw some training in there. And they spend a week building their code and an hour writing their training. Unless it's super simple training, that's probably a mistake, because this is super important. This is how your user interacts with your application, and where the real difficulty in conversational applications is getting that training right so you can naturally interface and interact with it. So my point being, spend time on your training, test it, and don't discount it and leave it to the end of your development process. Okay, last thing I'm going to talk about is overtraining. I have seen this. What overtraining is when you have 20 different utterances, and what you do is you then have 20 different trainings in there. Or you have the same utterance listed twice. What happens if you do this is you're telling Bixby's AI to be really specific. I gave you an example earlier where the training phrase was longer, but it just picked up a partial, my utterance was a partial match to that training phrase, and it actually worked. What you need to do is write some general phrases and then try some variations and see if they work. If you do that, it lets Bixby's AI be smart. Bixby's AI understands some variations in how people say things. When you overtrain, you're telling it, these are the exact matches you need to have. So in a sense, you're kind of dumbing down the AI. So watch for overtraining. Okay. Two really useful capsules for understanding training are the bank and the shirt capsule. These were not designed to show you how to do training. They're actually designed to show you to do transactions with Bixby. But what I really like about these is they're pretty simple, but they have pretty good training examples. Most of what we've been talking about is in these. So you want to go to GitHub and download these and take a look at the training. I think this is a good way to learn. I, for one, always learn by looking at sample code. All right, general resources. I'm going to share this deck. So I'm not going to go over these, but we have a website, a bunch of code on GitHub, a YouTube channel. We have a podcast. I'm the host there. We release podcasts bi-weekly. Follow us on Twitter or Facebook. And I told you, this presentation is already available online. There's the bit.ly link, bit.ly Bixby. It's just today's date, 7/10/20. Once again, my name is Roger Kibbe. That's my Twitter handle, Jonathan Pan. And really, it's now open Q&A AMA time. I hope you've asked some questions in the YouTube chat. If you haven't, start asking your questions and listen and ask your questions. And I'm going to ask Jonathan to go ahead and bring us both on screen.
Okay.
And maybe he has some questions that you guys have asked.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so let me see if I can get Roger's face on the screen real quick. Here. There you are. You can probably stop presenting too, if you like. Sorry, we have to manually adjust these things for now. Okay, let's check out some of the questions. And Armel suggests that we should share it on Twitter in case people forget about it. So I'm not sure if we tweeted before this in terms of the URL for this live stream. So that's a good tip. We should definitely.
Yeah, I think we did.
We did. Okay.
We went out this morning on Bixby Developers, but maybe we should tweet it right beforehand. Schedule it.
Next question from Penguin is in Black is, what capsules do you build? I think between the two of us, we have quite a few capsules on the marketplace. Some of mine would include like Copycat, Quizit, Story Builder. It's kind of a long list, but we've helped build some third-party capsules as well here and there. Simon, hello Simon, thanks for joining us. Mark, hello Mark, and Ryan. And a great question from Mark. This one's important. Does Jonathan have only 4 cats or more than 4? And Dana says, since I have no cats, 4 is 4 too many. And I must say that that will remain a mystery for now. And Jennifer Boolean, thanks for joining us, Jennifer. Hey, Jennifer. And Dana asks, do you always have to repeat the symbol? Seems not necessary.
So assume you're talking about in vocabulary there. Yeah, I get why you say it shouldn't be necessary, but it is necessary. So the first, when you're creating vocab, say if you have an enum and you're creating vocab, the first thing in your enum would be repeating that symbol. Just a platform oddity that you need to do.
Yes, and this next question. So enums are like slots in Alexa, except enums can be closed and slots can't.
Yes. So they are just like slots in Alexa, right? So slots in Alexa, you provide valid, if I remember, it's been a while since I've done any Alexa development, right? You put those valid inputs. And yes, enums can be closed. Slots can't. I don't remember the slots can't, but yeah. So, and then, right, and vocabulary is the equivalent of, what does Alexa call it? They have the equivalent of vocabulary, aliases or something like that. You can think of the vocab without an enum, and maybe that's the closest equivalent to slots if slots can't be closed.
Okay, and Dana just remarks that it looks more like actions on Google, so I have not actually built anything on Google yet.
I get that, yeah. And I think if you look at our UI and how you create training, there are some similarities between that and how you do things in Dialogflow. Mm-hmm. Obviously, a little different UIs, but definitely we look more like Google than Alexa in this regard.
And there are multiple during the section for role of. If you guys do have any specific questions about that, let us know. And welcome, Pete. Thanks for joining us. And Mark is asking, can you walk us through some of the UI as there have been changes and they're a little overwhelming? It's a great suggestion. I can do that. So this here is the Quiz It capsule, one of the capsules I built. It's a trivia capsule. And let me make sure, yeah, okay, my face isn't really in the way here. So to get to this, so we upgraded training from training V1 to training V2. And let me, kind of squish some of these that, we don't really need to look at. So here, back in training V1 land, this is what the UI looked like. And for now, you can still access it under resources en, and then there's a training shortcut here to training V1. And training V2 though is at the root directory, which is right here. And you'll see that the UI does look quite different, but really the functionality is very similar, just with some enhancements along with some quality of life improvements on the right. So let's say we want to add a training, we can just do add. And then I actually don't really remember this capsule too well, but we could do get quiz, right? So here in the goal, you would just select a goal, whether it's an action or a concept that you want to end at, that's kind of up to you. For most capsules, it doesn't really make a difference when you set the goal to be either the concept that it outputs or the action that leads to that concept. Just sometimes if you want to specify which route based on the utterance, like let's say start a quiz, right? Using the get quiz action, which right here, if we have get quiz, it'll go through this action instead of, outputting the quiz directly, right? So that's just one type of specification as to whether you want to use, the action or the model as the goal. And in this utterances case, we don't need to flag or tag any thing here. But let's say we do start an easy quiz. Then in order to add an annotation, you just click and highlight the easy. And then we click value here. So then it adds this to the right side where you can add the value. And in this case, I believe it's difficulty easy. And just to kind of cover or kind of circle back on what Roger was saying, if we look at our difficulty models, we'll see that I have them here as enums because these are the only possible values for the difficulties in your quiz. So yeah, so now one quick thing about training V2 is don't forget to hit save right here for each annotation. Otherwise, you saw there when I tabbed to the different tab, I lost that annotation there. So that's just one thing to keep track of. And hypothetically, or let's just say for demonstration purposes, we have training V1, right? This would be start an easy quiz or whatever it was. And we'll just go through the same process here, but you would highlight this, set this node as easy, done, and then for the goal, get quiz. Right, so we just did the exact same thing in training V2. I'm just going to delete that one. And yeah, so you would just click save here, and then that would add the training right here at the top. Other things about training V2 that are worth mentioning, I actually got a little confused, but if you disable this training, it sometimes disappears. Well, if you disable a training and it's not there anymore, click this ellipsis and then click show disabled, and then it will pop up. Right. So sometime the first time I used training V2, I disabled one. I was like, where did my training go? And then I couldn't find it until I realized that it's right here. And also on the right, you can easily sort by the goals. You can even sort by specializations like the quiz. You can sort by prompts as well. So these are at input views. And let's see, and you can even sort by annotation. So different, trainings with specific annotations. Let me think, anything else about training V2 I should mention here? Not off the top of my head, but hopefully that gives a bit of an overview for training V2. So, okay. Let's
All right.
see.
While you're doing that, there's a couple more.
Huh?
Just one in particular, enum value is not the first in the vocab. Yeah, that's a little sloppy. It probably should be, but it works. It doesn't care about the order of those. But that's just some sloppy coding there. Why does some training show up as learned one day and not learned at some later date?
Huh. Yeah, that's a good question. I think oftentimes the trainings might like desync a bit in terms of what's being displayed and what's in the Bixby cloud. It's a known issue, and when you're building stuff for Bixby, you'll notice that often.
You should just compile it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So when you're developing and back and forth and doing that, so what happens actually is when you sync to the cloud, if you don't use something for 30 minutes, it actually reclaims that reclaims that space in the cloud, and so then it has to resync. So sometimes that happens. You should, if it's not learned, either you just need to compile and it'll get learned, or maybe you added some training that's causing a problem. So remember I talked about training where you have an issue where there's a confusion point. When you start adding things that cause confusion points, you start confusing the NL compiler, and it doesn't always work. So if you see not learn, you compile, and it does in it. You didn't change anything, or you changed something, then go look for confusion points in the training. That may be causing the problem. Jesus asked, what do you recommend for starting in the creation of a Bixby capsule? So two ways. One, if you go to bixbydevelopers.com, there's a getting started guide, and you can do that. If you're more of a video person, I'm going to send into, wrong link.
Yeah, I have the channel pulled up on the stream. I would recommend starting with the Hello World tutorial if you prefer code alongs and things like that. That will teach you kind of the basic, way to get started with Bixby Studio.
There's also a Bixby 101 series that's a little more high level.
Yes, if you want the higher level explanation for Bixby. I apologize if there's background noise. There's a dump truck passing through, collecting trash. So sorry about that, guys. The Bixby 101 series, like Roger said, is higher level. So yeah, whatever you prefer in that case, however you learn best. Also, our GitHub. Go download some sample capsules and mess with them too. It's a good way to get started too.
All right. There was an ask in last webinar how to access the Bixby US marketplace from a foreign country. I actually shared that to Twitter right afterwards. I gave you the link to Twitter, and then there's a Stack Overflow question about that. So hopefully that I put those in the chat. So hopefully that answers your question. Let us know if it doesn't. Matter of fact, if it doesn't, please add to that Stack Overflow question. We definitely like to answer questions on Stack Overflow because then you help the whole community. It's a great place to do that. All right, Mark Tucker. Is training v.1 and v.2 saved independently? What happens if you have both? Should training v.1 or v.2 be saved in source code control?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I can answer this. So here, let's see. Well, yeah. Here you'll notice that actually the exact same trainings exist in both training v1 and v2. So start a random difficulty quiz about computers. If we search here, start a random quiz on computers.
The third one you passed it is the fourth one down.
This one, right? Yeah. This one. You'll notice that all the trainings live in both training v1 and training v2. Training v1 though will be broken down into like different languages or locales and things like that into different folders. But other than that, they both access the same training files. So yeah, go ahead, Roger.
Oh no, I was gonna say, think of training v2 is a different UI for training.
Yes, yeah.
So same exact structure, but a different UI. You definitely should start using it because the training v1 UI is deprecated. We'll leave it around for a while, but you can take any capsule, even a capsule you wrote a long time ago, and training v2 will work. It's really a different UI and a different way of organizing training. We think an improvement over v1 training. Really good. Mark Tucker has another question. Training v2, is there a way to do text only or bulk inputs without going through each step of the UI?
So unfortunately, there isn't, but you can save time by kind of pasting in the code itself, right? So let me show you, if you click show aligned NL, you can kind of generate this or edit this. And let's say you want to make a new training, you can just click add, paste, and then it'll build the training like that for you. So that's one way to kind of do what you're saying. It's still a manual process, but you can save a lot of time if you generate the aligned NL somehow, and then you just paste it in. So yeah, it's not the most elegant solution, but it is it does save you some time doing it this way.
Yep. And I'll give you a little hint if you want to do that. Unofficial hint, somebody has written a Visual Studio extension that understands our training. And then you can go and it shows all of that and you can cut and paste around there, not to create training, but actually just to see all the training there. So a little less useful with V2 because it kind of V2 handles a bunch of things it did, but something you can check it out. I don't remember it, but if you search for it, you find it. Is it safe to edit training files in its text file directly? No, it's not. You'll see there's a binary part of training files. So no, you definitely need to use the UI to edit training files. Okay, let's see. What if I don't have any devices with Bixby, or do I? I spent some time trying to find it. Is there a PC version? Do I need to get a new tablet? Not ready for a new phone. Yeah, so to actually run Bixby, you either need a Samsung phone or a Samsung watch, although the watch is a little more limited in what it can do. I think in the last office hours, we talked about that. That being said, so the best way is definitely get a device, and best practice is to test on device and do that. That being said, in the simulator, the accuracy, particularly of the phone, that watch accuracy is a little funky right now, is really, really good. So if it works right in the simulator, you can type in answers, you can use voice, etc. You can do a lot of development and I have seen people, and I won't recommend this, submit capsules and get them working on the marketplace without testing on a device. I'll always tell you to test on device. I think it depends on the complexity of your capsule. If it's something pretty simple, you probably can get it working 100% just using the simulator. When you get something more complicated, you probably want to test it on device. And by the way, in the simulator, you can simulate the phone, which you can release to now. You can simulate the watch, which you can release to now. You also simulate the smart fridge and the TV, which don't yet have a marketplace. But you can start getting your capsules ready for those additional devices. I'll tell you, I in particular am super excited about the TV. I think there's a lot of really cool stuff you could do with voice and kind of interactive enabling TV, and Bixby can be an overlay over what's playing. So I've been spending my own personal time doing some thinking about TV and voice, but there's not a marketplace there yet. How do I know my NL training for a specific goal has generalized well for Bixby? Also, is a good rule of thumb like 80-20 training validation test split. Okay, lots of questions there. How do I know my NL training for a specific goal has generalized well for Bixby? You test, right? So go and create an NL training, and then test a couple phrases and see if they work with that. And in the debugger, you can actually see what training was invoked.
On that note, like for testing specific trainings, you can do that really quickly just by clicking on the simulator icon.
Yeah, well, that tests not the training. That's
Right.
a lot of NL.
That's true.
So that's
Yeah.
not testing natural language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a little different from testing the
Yeah.
natural language. Yeah.
That tests that actual specific training you typed in, but it's a little different than what that doesn't test is variations, right? Okay. Is there a good rule of thumb like 80-20 training validation test split? Well, I wouldn't say it's 80-20. I don't know if there's a good rule of thumb, but I might go 60-40, right? I mean, I'm just a big proponent of people testing their training. I think, and I'm not going to limit this to Bixby, I'm going to say it for all voice assistants. The biggest problem that I've seen, and I've tried a lot of capsules and a lot of skills and a lot of Google actions there, is there wasn't enough time spent on the kind of NL and the input and the training or equivalent across these different voice experiences to make it work well. So like I said, you spend all this time developing, but the primary way of interacting with your capsule is through training, and you don't spend any much time on it. That's not going to work well. Imagine if you're building a UI capsule and you got it all working in the command line, and then you spend an hour building a UI and then thought it's going to be great. Well, no one would do that with a capsule at the UI, right? People spend a lot of time on a capsule, a web app or a mobile app or a traditional, PC or Mac app. You spend a lot of time thinking about the UI. Well, think about training in natural language. That is your UI for that voice-only experience. So you got to spend a like amount of time getting that right. Now, yes, Bixby's multimodal, so there's a UI as well, but I just can't emphasize enough that I think it's a problem in voice development of people not really thinking of when I write all my development, just writing a command line version. Now I got to create the UI, spend the time creating the UI, the equivalent of the UI, which is creating voice training.
So I
You
guess
see capsules being submitted that are mostly overtrained or undertrained compared to your internal capsules. Overtrained. Yeah, I mean, overtrained, I see that a lot. Well, it's a combination. So I see overtrained where
it's both,
Yeah.
and we have some internal capsules that have a ton of training, right? And then we have others that have a lot less training. So yeah.
So that point about things being really specific and being the best voice experience. So a capsule that has a enormous amount of training is the Yelp capsule. That's actually a pretty broad thing to build a voice application for, right? Yelp does a bunch of things and searches for a bunch of things. So there's a ton of training there. I think it works pretty well, but that was really ambitious. pretty advanced.
I
So
would describe the the amount of training as kind of a tipping point, right? If your capsule has only a certain number of things it needs to do, you can usually get away with like maybe 20 or 30 trainings. But once if your capsule gets so complex and then it has like a lot of different routes and stuff, then you often have to have too many trainings, because once you get like a little too specific, Bixby gets a little confused, and then you can only go in one direction, and that's to make it super specific, right?
I think it depends. So let me give you two capsules that you may be aware of. And they're actually across different platforms. Even if you haven't used them on Bixby, you've probably used them on other platforms. Big Sky and Question of the Day. Okay, Big Sky has a lot of training. There's a lot of different ways to ask about the weather. Question of the Day, I've seen the training for both of those. Question of the Day probably has 10 trainings. I don't know. I'd have to go look at it and things like that. I haven't looked at the code for that in quite a while. But it is really, really simple, because it's really simple. It's asking a question and asking you for an answer, and there's a lot of things you can ask it. Whereas something like Big Sky for weather, there's a bunch of ways you can ask for the weather. There's a bunch of follow-ons you can ask, so that has complicated. So really, it is pretty situationally dependent, depending on your capsule, how much training is needed, and you just need to think about the ways that people interact with your capsule. So we're kind of out of questions, and we're out of time.
Whoa.
Wow, you guys did
What
well.
good timing, yes.
So, like I said, this is already up on, if you want these slides, let me go paste that into, I should have done that, into the chat. There, and I'll put that in our Bixby, in our Twitter, and in our Facebook as well. That's a great way to keep in contact with us. Matter of fact, all of our, and on YouTube, this will go live. So if you want to go review any of this there, and we've tried to put everything on YouTube that we do, these office hours, and we also put all of our presentations that we possibly can online. There's a giant GitHub repo full of presentations. If you go to see this, you can find a bunch of past presentations. So thanks, guys. Hey, I would love to hear, when we think about office hours, we spend a lot of time noodling and what's the best thing to do for the next office hour. We're still figuring out that. So if you have some ideas for what we should do for the August, September, October office hours, or just things that are confusing you, please share. You can just DM us, or you know what? You can DM Bixby developers. You can DM Jonathan or me directly. Maybe directly might even work even better with some ideas or thoughts on there. Share however you like, because love to understand where your either challenges are development-wise, or where you want to grow Bixby-wise, because we do our best to guess, but we're not always right. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks guys for joining. I guess I'll be ending the stream, and you guys can catch this again on our YouTube channel soon. So thanks for coming.